Ah, the cheating scandals, my favourite part of motorsport history, especially when you look at the lengths that some people will go to try and gain that competitive advantage. And this is the thing with motor racing, the rulebooks don't always necessarily have a do not do in very black and white wording in said rulebook, which is why in Formula 1 as an example the car designers will go, well it says I have to have a diffuser that fits to these dimensions, but it doesn't say how many diffusers I can have. And those are the bits that make F1 what it is. Not nice liveries on the cars. I am of course talking about things like the blown diffuser, the double diffuser, the mass dampers and even DAS as an example. Now obviously if I named every single piece of innovation here I'd be here all day, so please don't get upset that I missed the one that you were thinking of. So when holes in the rulebooks are exploited, that makes people take notice. It then means that they have to create their own versions of that thing to keep up. But there are times where teams have flat out tried to deceive the officials by flat out circumventing the do not do this sections of rulebooks. So we're now in the territory of things like option 13, the alleged 2019 Ferrari engines, the lead shot that I covered earlier in the week, beginning of the week, last week, whenever it was, and dodgy restrictor plates. And that's exactly what Toyota tried to do in the 1995 World Rally Championship with a genius hack applied to the Celica. And that's the pronunciation I'm sticking with because that's how the ladies said it on the adverts at the time. And it wasn't the first cheating scandal to happen in rallying either. In 1991, Mitsubishi were disqualified from the 1000 Lakes Rally for having illegal fuel. In the 1993 San Remo Rally, Carlos Sainz Sr. was also excluded for dodgy fuel. And then in 1986, in the aftermath of that crash, there was controversy when Peugeot was allowed to run side skirts on their T16, despite them being flat out banned. And the FIA also ignored the fact that Peugeot hadn't built enough of that same T16 to meet the minimum build requirements. It's alleged that it was another one of those pro-gamer moves made by Brazil's favourite FIA president. Toyota, on the other hand, was not so overt with its little hack. Now, rally regulations at that time required everything to be run by Group A regulations, and to an extent Group A still exists as it's sort of the starting point for things like TCR homologation and other things like that. The Group A is the win on Sunday, sell on Monday class for me, as the cars that are being raced in the WRC and even in things like the BTCC and to an extent the ATCC at the time were the same cars you could buy at any dealer showroom. This class cut down on the famous homologation specials that flooded Group B and also down in Australia where they would build things like the Bathurst Special, which was basically the same car that was already running but with more power to run down the Conrod Straight. The FIA basically said that the minimum build requirement was 2,500 cars over 12 months to make sure that these cars were basically modified production cars. But rally cars were allowed to be modified a little bit further than what was being run on the track. They were often turbocharged and fitted with four-wheel drive systems, but from the outside, standing still, they were outwardly the same sort of car that your dad would have had. Which is why I, like many other people who were kids in the 90s, picked the cars that we supported based on that fact. My dad had a Sierra, so I followed Ford in the BTCC. Toyotas, driven by Carlos Sainz and Juha Kankkunen, won the WRC in 1990, 1992 and 1993, with Didier Auriol winning in 1994. But by the time 1995 rolled around, the Japanese had stepped up their game. Sainz had moved to Subaru where he was partnered with the ultra-talented, if a bit crash-happy, Colin McRae. And I know that might upset some people, but it's true. McRae shunted or rolled his car more often than he actually finished a rally. And there were other names on the grid, or actually names at Subaru, such as Richard Burns, he was just coming through, and a few others. So, put simply, there were some decent names coming through at the time, and Mitsubishi had Tommi Mäkinen. And the performances show because Mitsubishi and Subaru won the opening 3 rounds of the season. Auriol won the 4th round of the season, but that was it really. That was the only round that Toyota would win, Auriol's home race in France. Kankkunen and Auriol would get onto the podium, but that was as good as it got, and Subaru and Mitsubishi were still the ones to beat. But then at the Rally Catalunya, Toyota got exposed. Because of the death of Henry Toivonen in 1986, the FIA was really paranoid over how powerful cars could be, and even though these cars were less powerful than the Group B monsters, they were still faster. But still, the FIA wasn't taking any chances and ordered the cars to have restrictors fitted to limit the amount of power that they could put out. At that time, it was around 400 horsepower. How a restrictor works is it restricts, the amount of air that can reach the engine and in turn limit the amount of power it can use. NASCAR was using these plates at Daytona and Talladega for years before they fitted a variable system to the cars that they didn't need to keep taking out, and if you had a moped when you were 16, there'll have been one on there too, and most lads I knew at school had them taken off. I think also in Japan they were used on road cars to limit top speeds before electronic limiters became common. Now there is a diagram as to how the Toyota Restrictor was built, and I'd love to put it in the video, but to be honest it's just so confusing to read. I can't understand it, and I don't think a lot of people that are new to this will be able to understand it as well. I'll leave a link to the picture in the description so you can have a look at it while I'm talking, and I'm sure some of you anoraks might figure out how it worked, but I need to assume that everybody doesn't know what's going on here, if you can see where I'm coming from. So it'll be in the description and you can look at it at your leisure. Toyota had these restrictors analysed before and after every single rally, or at least after every single stage, and every single time it was deemed totally legal. The FIA would have the restrictor removed, it would be looked at, the dimensions would all check out, and then it would go back into the car so it can move on to the next stage, the next rally, or wherever. Now the key bit to remember here, legal when taken out. When the restrictor was taken out of the car, for all intents and purposes, it was exactly the same as the one in Mackinnon's car, or McRae's car, or Sainz's car, or whoever's it was. It was perfectly legal. The FIA could disassemble the restrictor, take it completely apart, take apart the turbo, everything would match up, and it was totally fine. But it's when it went back into the car, that's where the trickery started. Toyota had engineered this plate in such a way that it would allow more air into the engine and therefore generate more power. It was only a small opening, but the concept is similar to putting your finger over the tap and spraying water everywhere. A lot of air or a lot of pressure backed up and then forced through a small hole, and so on and so on. At least I think that's how it works, but you know, the concept is still pretty much the same. When the car was accelerating, or at least had the power being put down and the turbocharger was being spooled up, what would then happen is this restrictor plate would be moved backwards to completely negate what the FIA wanted of this restrictor plate, and that too would allow more air into the system. And it was something in the rumoured region of about 25% extra air going into the engine, and overall it added up to about an extra 50 horsepower. But the thing is, that restrictor plate, when it only moved 5 mil or so. Tiny amount for a lot of extra power. But when the turbo wasn't running, or basically the engine was off, the turbo moved back that 5 mil into the correct position, fooling the FIA into thinking everything was kosher and that Toyota wasn't taking the piss. But as the rest of this video might have already given away, it turned out that Toyota was taking the piss. And how it was all discovered is unknown. Maybe Toyota got complacent, maybe there was some careless talk in the pits, or maybe a recently fired engineer turned whistleblower, which is the believed thing that happened. It could be any one of those, but either way, Toyota was caught and kicked out of the 1995 championship and banned entirely for 1996. The cheat was so genius that even Max Mosley was impressed, saying, "It's the most ingenious thing I've seen in 30 years of motorsport," before adding, "Inside it was beautifully made. The springs inside the hose had been polished and machined so not to impede with the air that passed through. To force the springs open without the special tool would require substantial force. It's the most sophisticated and ingenious device either I or the FIA's technical experts have seen for a long time. It was so well made that there was no gap apparent to suggest there was any means of opening it." But what's even funnier here is that Toyota had intentionally tried to cheat their way through the 1995 season and still could only win one rally. It's like the equivalent of, you know, some guy on Call of Duty using aimbots or wall hacks or whatever it is and still ending up not winning the game. They used to say that the car in front was a Toyota, but it couldn't even get to the front. But I'd like to know what you think. Do you think Toyota would have got a better return on investment by playing the game properly, or was the whole thing worth a punt? Maybe if they realised it wasn't winning them races, they should have just given up, but they might have been way in too deep by this point. But like I say, leave any opinions down in the comments, even though this really isn't an opinion piece. And while you're scrolling down, if you haven't already, like the video, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to subscribe and get that bell on so you never miss out on a future video, as we are in the remaining sort of below 25k before a bet is a bet. There is also a massive thank you to the patrons of Patreon for their continued support. If you do wish to help support me on a more personal level, you can join the fine folk on your screen by clicking the link in the description, where there'll also be a link to my socials, to Discord, and also a link to the Toyota restrictor plate. So that's it from me. I've been Ada Millward. Have a great weekend where you live in the world, and I'll see you all on Sunday for the next round of the Potato Nation Sunday League in Assetto Corsa. So I'll put a thing up for that going live and stuff like that. So until then, goodbye.